One of the words, big fancy Bible words we use about God is omniscient, all-knowing, and omnipresent. And when we say omnipresent, a lot of people think that means he's here and he's there. He's present everywhere. But it means more than that. It means he's not only present everywhere, but he's present in every time dimension. So, yes. So he's already seeing your tomorrow. In creation, he had already seen COVID. So you might say, oh, then a loving God, if he had already seen it, why didn't he fix it? Because, we get in fancy Bible language, but it's the decrees of God. And what God decreed, first and foremost, is his plan. And his plan was, you do things my way, it's going to work out. You break my law and be disobedient to me, and you start a chain reaction that cannot be stopped. And that's what Adam and Eve did in Genesis chapter 3 when they disobeyed God. It created a chain reaction that God's plan said, you sin, you ever sin, then you have bit into the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and that's an eternal deal. So, well, eternal until he comes back. It's a lifelong deal. So all that bad is happening, and he saw it happen. He's omnipresent. He's here, and he's in Jackson right now. But he's also omnipresent in that he's in 2021, and he's in 2050, and he's in 12 BC. He sees the whole time continuum. Whereas we're these little old finite beings that we see what's right there in front of us. And that's hard for us to deal with. It's hard for us to understand. But that omnipresent thing and omniscient thing, he's all-knowing, and he's not bound by time and space as we know it. That almost sounds science fiction, but, like time travelers and things like that. But that's God. So yeah, COVID didn't surprise him. World War II didn't surprise him. It's proving out his perfect plan. Not that he wanted World War II. He didn't want COVID. He wants, 2 Peter said, he wants all people to come in repentance to him. But they're not doing it. So that just maintains this domino effect of sin begat sin, begat sin, begat sin. And that's not going to stop until he comes back. That was a 5-minute answer to a very simple question. I apologize, but that...
Best thing I can do is have faith and keep your mouth shut.
Well, yeah. Just catch you up real quickly. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this. If you remember back several weeks ago, when the fourth trumpet, we've had all these trumpets. 7 angels came forward, got 7 trumpets. The first, second, third, and fourth were those 4 horsemen. And they brought all kinds of bad stuff on the earth. 1/4 of the population of the entire earth was killed. After that 4th trumpet and the 4th horseman got through with his stuff, do you remember an eagle flew over and said, woe, woe, woe. And that word woe just means look out, it's coming. So 3 woes, meaning there were 3 more angels to blow 3 more trumpets. The next trumpet was the 5th trumpet. So that was the first woe. And that was that demon attack, that demonic attack on the earth that unleashed all kind of torment. And people wanted to die, and they couldn't die. God wouldn't let them die. And they were hiding out in caves, and they were crying out to God, saying, just kill me, I want to die. And he wouldn't let any of them die. The 6th trumpet is the second woe. And it comes in 2 parts. And we did the first part. It was when those 4 angels came forward with the 4 winds, the 4 corners of the earth, and that army of 2 million soldiers. And it just extended this. And it was more demons attacking the earth, more warfare, more killing, more bloodshed, more people dying, and they were killing them by smoke and sulfur and fire. And that was part one of the second woe. And tonight we do part two. We finish the second woe tonight. It's fixing to get, I started to say it's fixing to get interesting. It's already been interesting. But it's fixing to get a little more confusing because we're in chapter 11 of Revelation. And when you get into chapters 12, 13, 14, it's kind of like if you've got a camera and we've had our telescopic lens zoomed in. And that's what all of this stuff is. He has zoomed in the lens and he's seeing little fine details of the picture. Now, after tonight, he's going to zoom that lens back out. And it's actually dealing with some stuff, some broad stuff that happens while all of this is happening. So next week we'll have to understand that, and I'll explain that again, that we're going to get into a wider look, and we're going to look at 3 or 4 or 5 topics that take place while all of this is going on, that pretty interesting thoughts. But you can't put Revelation in chronological order. You can't say chapter 14 follows chapter 13, which followed chapter 12. Prophetic stuff in the Bible jumps around. And so after tonight, we're going to take a huge jump for a couple of weeks. And then we're going to jump back into this thing with what's called the bowl prophecies. But let's finish this second woe, the second bad thing that's happening to people. Remember, he's just seen this crazy 2 million, some say 2 million people, some say 2 million demons. He's seen this army of 2 million, led by these incredible, mighty demons, wreak havoc across the earth. And so our story picks up tonight with him saying, there are a couple of times in this story that John doesn't just see it and hear it, he's actually asked to participate. Remember last week, what did he do to participate? He ate the scrolls. It's almost like he's sitting there as an observer, writing stuff down, and God says, John, go take the scroll. Who, me? I'm just here to watch. He had to take the scroll away from this mighty angel and eat the scroll. And it was sweet in his mouth and bitter in his stomach, which all of this, we want Jesus to come back. That's a sweet thought, but it's bitter to think of the horror that's going to take place. So he's asked again tonight to participate. John was given a rod, a measuring rod, like a big stick, to measure. And a voice came out of heaven and told John to go and measure the temple and measure the altar and measure the people who are there to worship. But don't measure the courtyard, because it's been given to the nations and they are going to trample that courtyard. And they're going to trample the courtyard for 42 months. That's 3.5 years. They're going to trample the courtyard for 3.5 years. Then John heard that same voice that told him all about that measuring. He heard the same voice say that he was giving his authority to his 2 witnesses. And he was given authority to the 2 witnesses to prophesy. And these 2 witnesses who were called the 2 lampstands, or the 2 olive trees that stood before the Lord of all the earth, they were to prophesy for 1,260 days. That's 3.5 years. And so you've got the nations trampling the courtyard of God for 3.5 years, and now God's given authority to his witnesses to prophesy for 3.5 years. And if anybody came along, and they were doing this wearing sackcloth. And if anybody came along and opposed them and tried to bring harm to these guys, they would breathe fire out on them and kill them. That's how they'd die. If they tried to oppose the two witnesses, they'd get breathed on with fire. And these two witnesses could stop up the sky and make it to where it couldn't rain. They could call down plagues over the earth. They could turn water into blood, and they could do any of this stuff anytime they wanted to. And so for 1,260 days, they're prophesying and they're breathing fire down on anybody that opposed them, and they're performing these mighty miracles. And then finally, at the end of their time, their 1,260 days, the beast came up out of the bottomless pit, and he opposed them, and he defeated them, and he killed them. And he left them laying there in the street of that great city. That city that symbolically is called Sodom or Egypt, the city where Jesus was crucified. And they left these two witnesses dead in the street, and people would come by and look at them, and they wouldn't let anybody bury them. They couldn't be put in the tomb. And so for 3.5 days, people would come by and they would celebrate, and they were partying, and they were rejoicing over the death of these two witnesses of God. They were even exchanging gifts because these two guys were dead for 3.5 days. At the end of 3.5 days, God breathed life into these two dead witnesses. And they got up. And when they did, it scared everybody half to death. It terrified the people. Terrified them, I'm telling you. And these two witnesses, then, as they stood up, heard a voice come out of heaven that said, "Come up here." And the two witnesses were caught up in a cloud and ascended into heaven. And everybody, all of their enemies, saw it happen. And instantly, when that happened, a great earthquake took place. And 1/10 of that city was destroyed. And 7,000 people were killed. And great fear fell on the people. But the ones who didn't die, many of them turned to God and gave Him glory. And that was the end of the second woe. But the third woe would be coming soon. Now, folks, I've told you from way back that the way we're going to do this is, I'm never going to say dogmatically this is what this means and this is what this means, because, and I've intentionally I'm using several different sources for what we talk about in here on Wednesday nights, but I've got two main commentaries that I'm using. One of them, the guy never comes out and says it, but I'm pretty sure he's what you would call an amillennialist. Everything's symbolic, nothing's literal. Most of this stuff, he would say, happens in the church age and all of that. The other commentary, the guy would probably admit to being a premillennialist. And everything is not figurative or symbolic. It's very literal. And so I've got these two commentaries that disagree with each other. I like the amillennial guy, even though theologically I probably disagree with him. But I love the way he writes, because he says, some say this and they have a good argument, but I think this, and here's why I think it. And then when he gets to the end of his little concluding paragraph, he'll say, no matter who's right, what can we learn from this part of the story? And I love that approach, because I think the story, no matter which way you lean, there are lessons in there that we can take away. So really that's what I'm looking for, but I'm going to try to give you both sides of the argument, and you decide which way you want to believe, and that's fine. There is nothing in Scripture that dogmatically says this is absolutely the way to interpret this. If you listen to the one, he makes a great argument for the amillennial way to everything's symbolic. You listen to the other one, he makes a great argument that nothing is symbolic. And you go, well, who am I supposed to believe? It's like Brady. I was talking to Brady about it today, and Brady said, well, that's why he likes to think he's a pan-millennialist, that everything will just pan out in the end. So that's one way to look at it. All right, first, John was given a measuring rod. The word for measuring rod there in the Greek it's describing what would kind of be a bamboo shoot. It was hollow in the middle. It was very lightweight. It was something they used in those days, and they would cut it at certain lengths. And because it was so light, but it was real sturdy. I mean, you take a piece of bamboo. If you've ever tried to cut a piece of bamboo or saw through a piece of bamboo, it's not easy to do. Extremely light, but extremely durable. And they would use this bamboo. It wasn't bamboo, but it was like bamboo. They'd use it as a measuring stick. So, he's given a measuring stick, and what was it he was told to do? Measure the temple, the altar, and the people. The people. All right, so we get to our first disagreement between the two commentaries. If it's literal, if you're talking about a literal temple, literal altar, and literally the people, what temple do you think this would be?
Called God.
Well, yeah, but there were several in the Bible. Maybe David's temple, but David's temple was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. Herod's temple was destroyed by the Romans.
Right. Hasn't been one since then, has it?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that next temple, maybe the millennial temple, maybe the temple, maybe there's going to be a temple built, and that would go along with that thinking that there's yet to be a temple built. There'll be a third temple if you take the literal approach. How would you literally measure the people? What people?
Get yourself scale already.
Weigh them out like a bunch of cattle? What people? No, not the 144,000. Well,
These people after the rapture.
yeah.
Haven't died yet.
True.
Those people.
The worshipers at the temple. Who would be worshiping at a temple in Jerusalem? Jews. Jews.
Well, aren't they in the process of building the temple?
Right now?
Or gathering the
Well, that's another story, but I had a guy at the Hebrew Institute in Jerusalem tell me that they had the blueprints, they have the furnishings, they have the money, they have trained servants and priests. And somebody in our group says, well, then what are you waiting for? And he said, to get rid of the Dome of the Rock.
Right.
And when he said that, his nose kind of curled. And we all just kind of said, okay.
That's where it's sitting.
He was angry when he said that. Yeah, that's the thinking, is that's where it will be. So apparently there'll be a third temple. That's the temple where they're worshiping. The Jews are worshiping there. And if you really want to think about that, why? What's the point in measuring the temple? And the altar is just the place of worship. And then the people that worship there were the Jews that would worship in the temple. Why would God want John to measure that? Because he said so. Are those Jews going to be saved? Yeah. Most probable answer to that question is that it's God's way of marking his territory. That's protected. His people are protected. Remember what Jesus said, those whom the Father has given me will not be lost. He's lost none of them. And so if God's claimed a person through salvation, then he's not going to lose anybody. So it's God's way of saying, I know these people, I know who they are, I know where they are, and they're not going to die. We're not going to lose them in the process. The symbolic approach, the other commentary, would say that all of that represents the modern day church. And his little concluding paragraph was, whether you believe it's literal or whether you believe it's symbolic, that's just up to you. The takeaway is, God knows where you are. God sees you, God knows you, God's got you, and nothing's going to happen to you. Now you may die your earthly death, but spiritually speaking, God has marked his territory on you. The one guy would take more of a literal approach and say this was God's way in the rest of the tribulation of saying these people aren't going to get lost in the tribulation. There's a lot more we could say about that, but I really don't think it would accomplish much. The courtyard of the nations being trampled for 42 months. It's 3.5 years. That falls into the literal approach, the premillennial approach of thinking that there's 3.5 years of tribulation, then there's a midway point, and then there's 3.5 more years of a great tribulation. You can go to Matthew 24, and Jesus even used those words, that there will be a great tribulation.
It says, and the holy city shall they tread underfoot 40 and 2 months.
Yeah, that's 3.5 years.
That's
Jerusalem. Yeah, the holy city.
Is that the same 3.5 years as the witness?
Good question. I say yes. Now, what do I know? But I say it is. Because that thought, they follow each other. So I think it's got to be. I think so. While the nations are trampling the courtyard, the literal interpretation would be that Satan and his armies and his demons have just taken over the earth, and Christians are a minority. Churches have been destroyed. God's people are under persecution. The ones that have been saved by the 144,000 Jewish evangelists and others, there are Christians on the scene, but they're under enormous persecution. And as that's going on, God did not leave them. And that's a theme throughout the Bible, is that God never leaves his people without a witness. God always provides, even the worst of times, God provides a witness for his people. And so during those 42 months, when we use it as a crude statement, but in a literal sense, all hell has broken loose. While that's going on, God gives, at that same time, God gives his 2 witnesses. So to answer your question, I think it is. I think even the literal and the figurative people would say this is an overlapping time period. It's just that one of them will say it's the church in general, and the 2 witnesses are the New Testament and the Old Testament. Whereas the literal people say this is a literal 3.5 years, and these 2 witnesses were 2 unbelievable people, literal people. The argument there is the word there for witnesses, the 2 witnesses, that word is never used in the Bible when it doesn't refer to actual people. It's never used in a figurative sense. Maybe this is the one time. I don't know. But it never is.
You know what the next question is?
Who are these 2 guys?
Who are the 2 witnesses?
You got any idea?
No.
Want to guess?
Moses
That's why I'm here,
Elijah.
to find out.
That's the most common theory, Moses and Elijah. Why would you say Moses and Elijah? What do they have in common with Moses and Elijah?
The law and the prophets.
Okay, law of the prophets, sounds good. Never, okay.
Wasn't it Enoch and Elijah taken up and never died?
Yeah, Enoch just walked on.
Well, I've heard it's those two.
Okay, that's a good thought.
Well, now, Moses died.
Moses died, but God buried him. It was a real mysterious type deal.
He was on the.
So he did die. Enoch and Elijah are the two that didn't die.
Right.
Who appeared in the New Testament with Jesus at the Transfiguration?
Peter, John, and
Well, but who?
Moses and Elijah.
Moses and Elijah. Who? All right. What were the supernatural things that the two witnesses could do?
Breathe fire.
Breathe fire, call down fire. Who in the Old Testament called down fire? Elijah.
Elijah stopped it from raining.
Elijah stopped it from raining. What could Moses do? Moses called down the plagues, and one of the plagues was
turn water into blood.
turn water into blood. Everything that the two witnesses did, Moses and Elijah did. So it may have been them, or it may have been Enoch and Moses, or Enoch and Elijah, or some even say John the Baptist and somebody else. And the figurative people say it's just the Old Testament and the New Testament. It's the Word of God. And they use a reference in the Old Testament where it says that any time the Jews wanted to make a truthful statement, you had to have two witnesses. Maybe it wasn't two literal people. Maybe it was. They had some pretty amazing.
If it was the Old and New Testament, how you going to kill them?
Well, yeah. Some
These
of the
people have to die.
some of the arguments break down. Yes, sir.
And in James, it says Elijah made it stop raining for 3.5 years.
Yeah. Elijah made it stop raining for 3.5 years. These guys had this power for how long? 3.5 years. Just a side note. Very interesting side note. Thank you for that. But what was their, all right, they did all these miraculous things. What was their main task? Witnessing. It uses the specific word prophesying. What does that mean? Predicting the future? Not just that. Prophesying in the Bible means proclaiming the truth. So, in a sense, I prophesy every Sunday morning when I get up to preach. You prophesy if you teach Sunday school. If you witness to a friend and proclaim the truth, you're prophesying. If you share biblical truth with your child or grandchild, you're prophesying. So prophesying is a job for all of us. We're about out of time, and I'm looking for what all I want to cut out. I thought it was interesting, the calling down fire. Anybody opposed them, they just spit some fire on them and killed them. And it says that's how they died, with fire from heaven. I bet that only had to happen a few times. I suspect folks got the word. Don't mess with those two guys. They got bad breath, it'll kill you. But who finally got them? The beast. Who is the beast? Where'd the beast come from? The abyss, the bottomless pit. Who is this beast?
Right?
Any other ideas? We're going to get to this, but in the rest of Revelation and other places in the Bible, like in the Old Testament, Satan is referred to as a dragon. The beast is somebody else. The beast is one who is empowered by the dragon. Antichrist. So this is a human being that is empowered with demonic supernatural power. But it also says when their time was up, which means their appointed time that God had given them. Even this beast couldn't step in until God was ready for it to happen. All right, whether figurative or symbolic, what lesson can you leave with that?
God sure is.
God's totally in control. God is nothing happens until He's ready for it to happen. It's His perfect time. You get that lesson no matter which way you take this story. So Antichrist is empowered by the dragon. His power comes out of the abyss. And then where did they die? I thought it was interesting. If the whole story is symbolic, and it sounds like I'm arguing for the literal, and I kind of am, I guess, because I lean that way. But if it's symbolic, why did God go to the trouble of adding in the story? You can find it right there in Revelation 11. I didn't add this. This is there. That it says that the two witnesses died and were left laying in the streets of that great city, which is symbolically known as Sodom or Egypt. If the whole thing's symbolic, why did God tell us that one line was symbolic? Just a little meat to chew on. Why Sodom and Egypt?
Why Sodom and Egypt?
Why Sodom and Egypt? Why did he say the great city, which is symbolically known as Sodom and Egypt? What did Sodom and Egypt have in common?
Well, Egypt is a country, not a city.
That's right. So you got a city and a country. Why put them together? Did God mess up geographically?
Moral, sinful.
Y'all, in the Bible, Egypt represents sin. Every time you hear of Egypt, it'll say they went down to Egypt. Now that naturally because it was south of Judea and Israel, but that's a symbolic thing. You always go up to Jerusalem and down to Egypt. Egypt represents sin. Sodom represented immorality and evil. And so the most evil city and the most evil country, and put them together. But then it said the city where Jesus was crucified. Where was that? Jerusalem, which is also referred to as the holy city. So here's the point. Whether it's symbolic or literal, it's calling the most holy of holies the most evil of evils. That's how far things are going to go. Whether literal or figurative, evil is going to be in total control, so powerful that it takes the holiest place on the face of the earth and brings it to the level of Sodom or Egypt. That's pretty bad thinking. This is interesting. How did the people respond to the death of the two witnesses? They celebrated. I can't believe they even exchanged gifts. Like, Santa Claus is dead. Let's swap gifts. That's hard to imagine that people would get that low, or is it?
No.
Have y'all seen on the news Americans who celebrate the death of policemen? Or Americans who celebrate the death of American military men and women? Y'all, it's easy to think of people being that despicable. Because we see it every night or every morning whenever you watch the news. So that's not hard to imagine. Then they ascended to heaven just like Elijah did. And Moses, God buried him. So that kind of goes to that Enoch idea. Enoch didn't even die. He just walked on with everyone watching. How's that going to happen? It happened in Jerusalem. How in the world could everybody see this happen?
Fuck you.
Y'all, we live in a day when something can happen in the caves of Afghanistan, and we see it in seconds. So there again, you can think that's symbolic or figurative, but it could very easily be literal. They would not only the whole world see it, but play it back and play it back and play it back. Watch those guys rise up in a cloud. How'd that happen? So that's not hard to. And then you had, as that's happening, you have an earthquake destroying a tenth of the city and 7,000 people. You might say 7,000, that's not a lot. Well, remember, you've already had a fourth of the population of the entire earth killed. Then you had a third of the population of the remaining population of the earth killed, on top of everybody who's died from the pestilence and wars and the famine and the meteors falling out of the sky and all the things that have been going on.
At some point, there ain't many left.
There ain't a whole lot of people left. And so now you've got, but it says an earthquake in that city, Jerusalem, is going to be rocked to the point that 7,000 people are killed. That's not hard to believe. You've seen pictures of what just happened with the 7.5 earthquake in Haiti. That place is a mess.
Jesus died.
I'm sorry.
The moment he died on the cross, there was an earthquake in Jerusalem.
Yeah, they parallel these two stories are, going right along with each other.
Temple Veil.
Temple Veil split. 7,000 people died, tenth of the city is destroyed, great fear. And then what happens? Remember one of the last lines of the story? Oh! People gave God glory. That's always, you might say, well, maybe they just said, wow, I guess God did that. No, that line always represents a relationship. So they either got saved or they were already saved, and maybe they were that bunch that John was told to measure in the very beginning of the story, who were worshiping at the temple, and God said, you're going to make it through this. And they did, because they're there at the end of the story praising God. So, again, the lesson is, if you're God's, you're okay. You're going to make it. Yeah, you may die of disease or something, but God's got you, and He's not going to give you up. Here's the sad part of that story, is that this second woe is kind of a turning point. From here on out, you're not really going to see people saved during the tribulation. The tribulation is fixing to kick into high gear. If you think it's been bad through this, then it's fixing to get worse. And that was that last line that John gave us, is that's the end of the second woe, but the third one's coming quick. So we'll get to that third woe maybe next week. We'll see.